Okay, great. So I'm here to talk to you about a revolution that's happening in retail. It's called direct to consumer. So what is direct to consumer? Direct to consumer is companies selling, manufacturing and selling directly to their consumer by using platforms like Shopify. And if you see what allows DTC companies to have an advantage is that they are more cost effective, right? So and they're able to maintain end-to-end control over their marketing, making, and distribution. So let me jump into a bit of a history lesson here. The very first department store that ever came up was in Philadelphia in the US in 1875. It was built by a person called Mr. Wanamaker, and it set the tone for retail for the next 125 years. It's been larger malls, smaller stores, all of that, but broadly the tone had been the same till about 25 years ago when the internet introduced e-commerce. With the advent or the introduction of e-commerce, the first things that actually happened was there were softwares that came up, but they were only built for existing traditional businesses. So what you would see online would be very similar and not as unique. It was only about 15 years ago when new e-commerce softwares, which allowed customization like Shopify came in, and you started seeing online brands being unique. So what is retail today? If you're trying to sell online, you really have two options. Either you're going to go down the marketplace route, or you can go down the direct-to-consumer route. I feel direct-to-consumer is the future of retail. I'm going to talk about why. Direct-to-consumer isn't a fad, as opposed to a lot of what we think. Dollar Shave Club, Warby Parker, these are real brands that have become billion-dollar plus brands in the US. I know in Asia we're a little behind, but it's catching up very, very quickly. So it's important to invest on this trend. It's important to be cognizant of the fact that consumers also evolve in their buying behavior. When you buy first, you don't know as much about buying online, so you end up going to a marketplace because you have trust. But as you evolve, your choices evolve, you start trusting your local brands. And that's where direct-to-consumer kicks in. In fact, there's a study by the Interactive Audience Bureau in the US, which says direct brands are supplanting indirect brands that had been selling traditionally for the last 140 years in the US. So it's important to understand the drivers behind the DTC revolution. And one of the first drivers that I would like to talk about is technology, right? With the emergence of new e-commerce tech, with the emergence of tools like Kickstarter, PayPal, HubSpot, GitHub, Upwork, and of course Shopify, what was once accessible only to well-capitalized bigger companies is now accessible to everyone. So that's one of the first drivers of this revolution. There's a thirst for niche. If you see, consumers now are not as happy with just normal products. They're looking for something unique. They're looking for unique buying experiences. They're looking for unique products. And that thirst is what is resulting in more DTC brands coming out. Qtrove is on Shopify is a brand that sells sustainable, natural, chemical-free products to an audience through a content-driven and a community-oriented approach. And they've found very good success with us. Social media is another big contributor, right? Because what it's done is it's basically just put you directly in touch with your consumer without the need for intermediaries altogether. Whether you're using Instagram, whether you're using Facebook, whether you're using YouTube videos, all of those are good ways to reach out to your consumer. So this is something that I always like to emphasize to any brand that I'm talking to, that you have to get creative. You have to use this channel very, very effectively. And it's free. So that's what's driving this revolution forward. So what's the purpose of all this, right? Like, what's the impact that DTC is creating? It's creating impacts on two fronts. One is your business side, and one is the consumer side. Talking about businesses first, the first business impact that I'd like to talk about is the bottom line. Badam Teas is one of the largest tea sellers online. What they've done very successfully is they've set up their website and started selling directly to consumers without the help of intermediaries in tea. What happens in tea is typically when you're selling tea, you basically export it and you keep it in warehouses, and the tea ends up staying in those warehouses for 12 to 18 months. So what you're drinking is essentially not fresh. So what they did was they got rid of that by directly selling it online. And in the process, they were also able to create better bottom line because their cost came down. So they were able to give back more to the tea growers. Creative control. DTC's biggest advantage, I feel, is your ability to communicate the way you want, to be able to create those unique experiences, to be able to put you in charge of your brand. And one good example of that is Bombay Shirt Company, which is a brand that I really like. It sells custom shirts you can buy for your size, you can customize it, all of which you will not be able to do as easily on a marketplace. So that's another big advantage. DTC is also changing the landscape of VC and how VCs play a role in growing a business. Because the cost of running a business is not as much, venture capital is something that you use very wisely then, right? There's this brand called MVMT, which started out in 2014, I think. And they were able to build up their sales to 70 million, all while staying away from venture capital. Why? Because copious amounts of money is not required to build that brand. In 2018, they were bought by Movado for $200 million. That's not to say that VCs do not like DTC. In the US in 2018, the first 3 quarters, there was a $1.2 billion funding that was done for DTC brands alone, which was 5 times what it was 5 years ago. So it's a trend that's growing. It's a trend that you can't ignore. On the consumer side, affordability is a direct outcome of DTC. Because of the better margins, you're able to pass on better prices. And Barbie Parker, the brand that I was speaking about in terms of eyewear, is one great example of that. When I was actually in university in the US, I used to always carry like an extra pair of glasses just because it was so expensive to buy one. It was almost like $500 if you lost or broke a pair of glasses. That's something that Barbie Parker changed just by ensuring that they sell directly and they don't sell through a retailer who's going to mark it up 5x or 4x. They're also a very good example of evolution of DTC because they've gone on to build their own stores and brought that online buying experience back into retail. Brand connection is another very important thing. I think brand connection is something that, according to the IAB study that I mentioned, almost 67% of people want to have some sort of direct connection with their brand today while consuming. And that trend is only increasing. So it's important to provide customized, personalized services and control that experience through all the touch points, something, again, that only DTC provides. So there's this brand called Freewill, which is a hair care brand, which understands your hair goals, your lifestyle, and basically formulates a product customly for you, for your requirements. It's doing really well. It's flying completely under the radar, right? It's a brand of the future. So you have to just understand that and work accordingly. So what is the biggest impact of DTC? Everyone will be a merchant, whether you're Virat Kohli, whether you're Ronaldo, or a regular Raj and Simran who want to commercialize your hobbies and passions. DTC is a way to do that. And one thing that I've really noticed that is going to become increasingly important in this trend of retail is that to grow, to succeed, creativity is going to be your biggest lever, not capital. So that's the thought I would like to leave you.